Welcome in. I'm your host, Mr. Fox, and you are in for another episode of The Counsouler. Today, we're going to talk about the shadow a little more in depth. This is a topic worthy of continual reflection and profound thinking, if you ask me. I don't think we can talk enough about this theory, this idea, this concept, this archetype, as it's referred to oftentimes. And the shadow is essentially those parts of ourselves that we do not acknowledge, do not embrace, are largely unaware of. We oftentimes fail to admit to ourselves. And what the shadow does, if it's not acknowledged, is, well, there's a cost, there's a price for not paying attention to and getting into accord with our shadow self, and it can wreak havoc. It can burst through at any time, and it seems to be always there, always sort of lurking. Now, while it is oftentimes referred to as the darker, more vile aspects of ourselves, um, the shadow, as I've come to understand it, actually has a lot of positive qualities, a lot of positive aspects to it and characteristics. And it's not so much that the shadow is a bad thing. And in fact, it's not even that it's not necessary, because I do think there just may, in fact, be a reason for why we all carry a shadow with us. I think the shadow has the possibility, if looked at rightly and acknowledged in the appropriate way, it has not only the capacity to change us and heal us, but there is tremendous potential in terms of transforming us and making our lives better and tapping into unrealized potential of the self. Um, there is fruit, there is gold in the shadow, I guess is what I'm saying. So let's get into this wonderful video on the shadow that I found. And without further ado, let's hop into it.
Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected, and is liable to burst forth suddenly in a moment of unawareness. At all counts, it forms an unconscious snag, thwarting our most well-meant intentions.
So think about that for just a second. I mean, the shadow, because it's largely repressed, it's not something that we put out into the world, or at least knowingly we don't put it out into the world. It's just there. We carry it around like an invisible sort of outfit that we wear. And we almost kid ourselves with the idea that we don't have that, or that it's not us, and we try to disown it. We try to deny it, we repress it, we suppress it, we just oftentimes don't want to give it its light, right? We don't shine a light on our shadow because, well, it might be disagreeable with the world. It might be contrary to what is deemed as acceptable or appropriate in the space of relationships with others and just with the general world around us. And so we, whether we know it or not, we oftentimes take great care to not show that side of ourselves as much as we can, when in fact, in the aspect of doing that, and the great care and patience and effort that we take to not show that and demonstrate that to the world around us, what generally ends up happening is that comes back to bite us in the you know what. And we pay a price for that. And so the more that we don't acknowledge and embrace and become aware of our shadow, the more it persists, the more it exists. And so we really need to begin to go, okay, who am I? And really the question is, who am all of I? And we can't really be honest about that question. And we certainly can't be honest about how we answer that question until we begin to ask the more pertinent question, which is, who is my shadow and what is my shadow? We have to make sense of all of ourselves, which includes those sides of ourselves that we don't want to give life to. We don't want to acknowledge.
Carl Jung talks about two types of shadows: the personal shadow, the unknown dark side of our personality, and the collective shadow, the unknown dark side of society. Starting with the personal shadow, Jung calls it the thing a person has no wish to be. It represents unknown or little known attributes and qualities of the ego. It is the sum of all those unpleasant qualities we like to hide from ourselves. The shadow contains inferiorities which everybody has but prefers not to know about. They seem weak, socially unacceptable, or even evil. The shadow is most visible when one is in the grip of anxiety or other emotions, under the influence of alcohol, etc. One may certainly blurt out a hostile remark during a friendly conversation. When we do not want to assimilate what we despise, we project it onto others. It is...
All right, there we go. Right back to projection, right? So, what we will come to find out as we explore the video and as you maybe do your own research on the matter, the shadow always comes to collect. It always will at some point surface, and it will wreak havoc. It will cause actual real life damage, even. It will cause complications in life if it is not given its fair due, fair shake. And the more we go along in life just pretending as if it's not there and that it doesn't exist and that we should just keep it, in the closet and pretend that it's not real, the more it seeps through. And it doesn't just seep through. Generally speaking, the more it's disowned when the right time comes around, if you will, or the wrong time, depending on how you look at it, it generally bursts through. I mean, it's a complete possession. It's a takeover. And you're no longer in charge of your own ship anymore. You're just now reacting and acting. And if you've ever felt that way, where you felt like outside of yourself, but also you're doing things and saying things, and you're definitely acting, and you're definitely reacting to the world around you, then you know kind of what I mean. It's a little bit like a blackout situation, is the best way that I can think of it. Or how you might hear somebody who's drank a lot of alcohol describe a blackout, right? Where they have no real memory or, cognizance of what took place. They are now just sort of there and they're doing things and their eyes are wide open and it looks and feels as if they know what they're saying and know what they're doing, but they're just quite not all there. And that's typically how the shadow shows up, and we are never more vulnerable when there are things going on in our lives. I mean, when we project a certain image, a certain presentation into the world, and when when we are very sort of beholden to that image and presentation, where we almost go out of our way to take such great care of that we don't do ourselves any favors. That's when the shadow shows up. It shows up when we're not really looking. And when we are at our most vulnerable, I would say. When things certainly are not right in our world, or in our space, in our relationships, we project our stuff out on into the world and onto others. And this has been said time and time and again, but I think we really got to think about what that means and what the implications of that are. I mean, just think about the state of the world as we speak right now.
Possible for one to be acquainted with one's shadow and be partly conscious of it, that is, under ego control. Many people, however, refuse to recognize their shadow so completely that the ego is not even aware of shadow behavior and thus has no possibility of commanding it. Under these conditions, the shadow is autonomous and may express itself in inexplicable moods, irritability, and cruelty. Throughout his writing, Jung refers to the importance of developing awareness of the shadow in psychotherapy and its projections in the individual's life. Although the shadow is usually perceived as negative, it can also be positive. In fact, exploring our shadow gives us access to many positive qualities. Jung writes that the shadow displays a number of good qualities, such as normal instincts, appropriate reactions, realistic insights, creative impulses, etc.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I mean, the shadow is not all negative, it's not all bad. Um, it's really just sort of this side of ourself that we fail to acknowledge. And yes, there tends to be, like I said, some of those more um, disowned aspects and things that we don't really want to admit or acknowledge about ourselves. But there are a lot of good qualities that are buried within that or that exist in tandem with some of those darker aspects as well. You know, and when you look at some of these things, it's not a matter of saying, well, I shouldn't feel that way, or I shouldn't think that, or I shouldn't have those thoughts or beliefs or whatever. It's more so asking the question, where do those come from? And, what are those saying? And it's really given a voice to those things that are not really given a voice to, and trying to make sense of that, and acknowledging those things. And sometimes this even takes, I think, sharing these things with close people, confidants, people that you have ultimate trust in. I mean, certainly it can be done in therapy, but I would say even more so if you've got good people, good relatives, close friends, etc., that you can really take the mask down. You can kick your feet up, let your hair down, as they say, and just say, you know what, I've been thinking this, or I've been feeling this. And it might be something kind of embarrassing, right? It might be shocking. It might be almost a little bit revolting, if I might say, to say out loud certain things that are really kind of like, ugh, where did that come from? Or, ugh, that's kind of ugly. That's kind of dark. But being able to do that actually pays off in the end. Because unless we're able to acknowledge those things, which is really just, the tentacles of the shadow at work, unless we're able to acknowledge those things and say them out loud and give them a life and a light and a voice, it will rule over us. It will break into and burst into reality. So the more that we sort of shun ourselves and shun the shadow grows thicker. It grows darker. And then eventually what ends up happening often is the smallest grievance, the smallest annoyance, or something that on the face of it is really a small slight, not a big deal. You get what I'm saying here. Something like that can be enough to sort of break us, right? It can like make us, as they say, snap, and we kind of like might end up going off in a tirade or getting really upset or angry or whatever at something, and we then tend to overreact, which is just really the shadow saying, "Hey, remember me? You haven't really acknowledged me. You haven't spent time with me for a while, and all this stuff you've been throwing on me. Guess what? Now I'm here." And once the shadow like kind of breaks through, and you're just sort of under its spell, um, I don't want to say it's over, but whatever comes out, whatever you say, whatever your behaviors might be, um, I mean, I'm just going to say it's not good usually. And usually there's some wreckage, some carnage, and just get used to the idea that there's probably going to be a whole lot of apologies in your near future, um, if you want to make right with the world and with your relationships, because that's generally the kind of wreckage and damage that happens when the shadow hasn't felt like it's been given its due. As we go.
etc. One of Jung's closest collaborators, Marie-Louise von Franz,
Imagine bringing your side project to life just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44.
writes, "The
You know,
shadow is not necessarily
hold on a
always an
second.
opponent."
Hold on. All right. Let's just make this an example. And I'm just gonna make this an example for myself here. Confession, and I don't think I'm alone here. I at this point refuse to pay for YouTube Premium. That whole function where you don't have to watch ads on videos. Like, I despise ads. And so I want to apologize for that ad, but at the same time, I'm now pissed off because it's thrown off my whole rhythm here. I'm gonna get back to it, but damn, can I not have an ad, please, as I record this? Is that too much to freaking ask? Okay, on with the damn video. On with the damn video.
In fact, he is exactly like any human being with whom one has to get along, sometimes by giving in, sometimes by resisting, sometimes by giving love. Whatever the situation requires, the shadow becomes hostile only when he's ignored or misunderstood. The shadow contains all sorts of qualities, strengths and potentials, which if remain unexplored, give us a state of impoverishment in our personality, creating unconscious snags which inhibit the growth and embodiment of these good qualities that lie dormant in our psyche. For instance, a person might believe that being assertive is being rude or aggressive, losing the qualities of confidence and the ability to speak up for himself in an honest and respectful way, which in turn may lead to less proactivity, make it more difficult to get a raise or job promotion, struggle with money, and so on. So, when a person encounters an assertive person, deep down he feels resentment and guilt, which makes his shadow blacker and denser. These valuable aspects ought to be assimilated into actual experience and not.
Yes. I mean, when done in a healthy manner, like I said a little bit earlier, I mean, the shadow, the work of the shadow is to help us, first of all, become more of who we really are, because it has so much to offer us if we look at it rightly and we address it in a healthy way and we give it a voice and we're able to express it and all that. I mean, there's a lot to take away there. But really, it could be said that coming to terms with the shadow is a process of maturation. It's definitely a sign of growth. And I would say a person who has recognize and become aware of their shadow and is far along in their journey on the process of integrating their shadow, and they're more aware of it than they were before, is somebody who's a lot more patient, a lot more forgiving, a lot more tolerant, a lot more accepting. They don't tend to fuss or pick battles over things very easily. They don't tend to find shortcomings with others. They tend to not be as judgmental. And there does seem to be, from my understanding and from people that I've observed, there tends to be this overarching peace that comes with that. There's a peace, there's a centeredness that I think somebody experiences when they are evolved and on the pathway to integration of the shadow self. They don't get easily disturbed. Nothing really gets at them very easily. It's not that they're perfect by any stretch. It's not that they can't get upset or can't get angry at times or whatever. But they have a lot more bandwidth in terms of I'm aware of others' shadows. I'm aware of the collective shadow more. And so the ways of the world and the flaws and imperfections of others don't get to me as much. And not only that, and probably even more so, I don't let my own stuff necessarily interfere with my seeing and experiencing of the world and of others and of myself.
Not repressed. It is up to the ego to give up its pride. We also encounter our shadow in our dreams. As a person of the same sex as the dreamer, it is what seems to be a criticism of our character from the unconscious, an inner judge of your own being that reproaches you, and the result is usually embarrassed silence. We must identify the contents of the shadow and integrate them into our personality. This is the process of the realization of the shadow, also known as shadow work. Here begins the painfully and lengthy work of self-education. One must enter into long and difficult negotiations with the shadow, a work, we might say, that is the psychological equivalent of the labors of Hercules. Through shadow work, one can observe one's shadow outwardly by watching one's emotional reactions and being radically honest about one's interactions with others, and inwardly by exploring one's dreams. This allows one to become enlightened and reduces the shadow's destructive potential, not so much as it were by waging war against the darkness, but by bringing the darkness to the light to the darkness. As Jung writes, there is no light without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection.
So, pinpoint on that quote right there. I mean, think about the depth and the profundity of that quote. I'm going to let you sit here for a second with it. One of the questions that I ask myself, because I've been doing some work on myself, and one of the things that has continuously come back to me time and again is the basic question, and it's really not even basic, because I think this is really at the heart of what we're exploring today. The question I ask myself is it me or is it them? You know, so for example, when I have an annoyance with somebody, or I have some sort of like, something throws me off about somebody. It could be something they said. It could be the way that they walk. It could be, somebody driving on the road that has a particular car or is, heaven forbid, going the speed limit, or I don't know, the way somebody dresses, the kind of clothing they wear. I mean, it could be anything, right? The question I come back to a lot right now is my issue with them, is that them or is that me? And just think about that question and think about the quote that you're looking at on the screen right now and take that into the grand scheme of things. Because when we ask that question, is it them or is it me? We come to find out oftentimes our grievance isn't them, and they are not necessarily doing anything wrong or, destructive or harmful or anything negative in any kind of way. Oftentimes, our stuff or our things, our annoyances, are more about us and less to do about them. And ladies and gentlemen, that is recognition of shadow. That is acknowledging the shadow self. And when you're able to ask that question, and I'm not talking about after the fact, I'm talking about as in real time, in real space, as you're in the midst of others, when you're able to pause and stop yourself and go, okay, now, is that coming from me? Is that about me? Is my problem or issue with them, is that actually more my issue and problem? Or is it them? And when you really wrestle with that and sit with that and just let that steep, you will oftentimes find you, in fact, are the guilty one. You, in fact, are the culprit. And that's really one of the major issues right now, I think, going on at large in the world. Is many of us, myself included, need to retract our projection of our shadows into the world. I can't say this enough, but I feel like the question I come back to, and it's kind of a utopic question, but what would life and reality look like if we all got right with our shadow? If we all got out in front of it? If we were able to pause and stop and really dig into where is it coming from and why is it showing up? And if we're able to do that before we've enacted the shadow into the world, and if we're able to do that before we speak and before we just impulsively react and respond, I think the world is better, our relationships are better, we're better, and I just can't say this enough. How profoundly healing that could be. And it's really no small act to be able to do that. And I realize, when we're talking, the bigger picture here and the whole world, being able to stop and do that, that's a pretty big thing. I mean, I guess the best that we can hope for is that we individually can do that for ourselves. Of course, we can't, knock people upside the heads and say, hey, get it together, right? As much as we might want to, in fantasy, say, hey, get your you know what together. We can't really do that. We can't really force healing onto somebody else. But what we can do, if we're doing the work, is bring our light into the world. And by doing that, I do believe that by offering that light and offering that space of, you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to have it all figured out, you don't have to know everything about everything. By offering our light into the world, I think that helps people attune and get in tune with their shadow self. So it's no small act.
One must not strive for perfection, but rather wholeness of personality. The lifelong process of individuation creates a balance between one's conscious and unconscious realms, aligning the ego to the self, the totality of one's personality. However scary or dark it is to confront our shadow, finding truth brings relief. Discernment of the truth is the process of authenticity, a painstaking excavation into the depths of our being to explore possibilities and limitations, distortions, and the buried and often forgotten parts of ourselves and abilities.
If you are sleeping in a position like this, you are wrecking your body and your breathing. Chronic neck pain happens when your cervical spine is repeatedly...
Most people,
Another
however, are too
challenge.
indolent to
Another
think deeply
challenge.
about even those small aspects of their behavior of which they are conscious, let alone to consider how the unconscious affects them. The shadow can also consist of factors that stem from a source outside the individual's personal life. Here's when we stumble upon the collective shadow, the dark side or the unknown or little known aspects of a society and culture. It consists of that which opposes our shared and collective values. The collective shadow refers to a huge, multidimensional, often horrifying yet elusive aspect of human life, to an immensity of harm inflicted by human beings upon each other and the natural world, and to the vast after effects of such harm in subsequent generations. We find the collective shadow in the projection of darkness and inferiority, in violence and oppression, in the invisibility of current suffering, in the denial of current responsibility, while
Okay, so in terms of collective shadow, which is like it will likely be its own future video because it's that big of a topic as well. Whoa, I mean, I have to stop and think here for a second. The collective shadow, I mean, there's a lot to tackle there. There's a lot to tackle because it could be said that the history of the world is littered and proliferated with a lot of lies, a lot of manipulations, a lot of storytelling that is based in history is written by the victors kind of mindset, right? And I got news for you. History is history. No matter who came out on top, no matter who apparently felt like their story was the only one to tell. It just so turns out that history includes all of us. All of us that have ever been, and all of us that ever will be. So, we have to, I think, first start with the individual or personal shadow, which is ourselves. And then we have to look at the grander scope of things with the collective. And the collective has a lot to say, and I think the collective interacts a lot with ourselves, clearly. I mean, we're all impacted and affected by things in the world, the news of the world, what we see, what we digest, what we read, what we become aware of, all those kinds of things in the grander scope and frame of the world. I mean, that just, we recognize that, we see that, and we feel that, and we take that on to some extent, whether we realize it or not. And I think we have to ask ourselves, once again, like, is that the world that I'm reacting to, or is that me? And if I'm reacting to something in the world, what does that mean? And what can I do with that? And how, if I do really truly find some sort of grievance and fault with something that doesn't sit right with me about the world or whatever, how can I express that in a healthy way? And how can I get my message across and my message through? And it needs to be said, but that's kind of a challenge right now in and of itself. I mean, as I make this video, We are literally seeing speech being compromised, being silenced, being canceled, the suspension of certain people on TV and whatnot that are sharing thoughts and views. We're seeing and hearing people being assassinated. And so the message I can't get across enough as it pertains specifically to the collective shadow is, how do we communicate in a way in which it's healthy and yet not at the expense of others? How do we express and get across our message, perspectives, and views without demonizing and vilifying others? Because that's just continuing the grasp of the shadow. That's just continuing the grasp of the collective shadow. We have to learn what we can do and how to do it better in terms of the shadow's expression. And that takes a lot. And that's a gigantic reckoning.
The collective shadow material may be acted out brutally in wars, massacres, and genocides. It may also hide under the often attractive cloaks of missionary activity, such as mandating the use of particular languages, an Orwellian reality that we are experiencing in the present time. As is the nature of all shadow material, whether individual or collective, its existence and influence may be pervasive without being obvious. The collective shadow manifests outwardly in atrocities, persecution, physical suffering, sickness, poverty, malnutrition, alcoholism, crime, the death of cultures, and so on. It may also manifest more inwardly amid the complexities of each individual psyche as hatred toward oneself, one's heritage, and one's culture, depression and feelings of impotence, the desire for revenge so that others might experience something like one's own pain, etc. The collective shadow is what has historically been labeled evil. In the Christian tradition, it would be the devil, and someone who's possessed by the devil loses his human quality and acquires a demonic nature. Our primary response to evil, for Jung, must be the quest for self-knowledge, for wholeness, which presumes the assimilation of shadow material. The individual must know relentlessly how much good he can do and what crimes he's capable of.
Okay. Boom. Boom. Right there. Boom. We must know relentlessly how much we can do and what crimes we are capable of. And now, of course, I'm paraphrasing that a little bit. But we need to get a better handle, a better understanding, and be more honest about our capacity for darkness, our capability to commit atrocities and heinous acts, and to do things that otherwise we wouldn't most normally do. And how many times and how often have we seen or heard stories in which there are otherwise fairly decent people, that appear to be pretty good and, seem to live pretty good lives and whatnot, and, have it all seemingly put together, if you will. And we hear these stories about, okay, they commit some sort of heinous crime. They do something that is so counter to what what they were appearing to be like, that it's like it totally knocks us over in terms of our perspective and perception, and to the point where we're like, well, that is just mind-boggling. That is like crazy. How could so and so do that? I didn't know that they had that in them. I didn't know that they were even capable of such a thing. They seem like X, Y, and Z. They were so nice and kind and so giving, and they were so reliable, blah, blah, blah. And then you hear, some of the worst of the worst. To the point where it's like, well, who are they really? And were they the shining person with, everything put together? Or are they truly this force of darkness, I guess, that did all these terrible, horrible, horrific things? So who are they really? And the truth, I think, is, and it's not an easy thing to really chew on, but the truth is, they are both. They are both of those representations. On the one side, I think you could say this was more of a persona. This may have been more ego. This is how I want the world to see me. But on this other end, this is more the shadow. This is more of maybe those impulses that are closer to the actual me, but that I've been repressing and not acknowledging for so long, and that I have now turned to that, or I have done something, even if it was like a one-off or a one-time sort of deal where I had a lapse in judgment and I just acted out in some kind of way, and now I've got to pay the consequences. I mean, and sometimes people they have a lapse in judgment or whatever, or they have a really bad moment where, something's going on. They might be intoxicated in some kind of way, and they just kind of really make horrendous choices or decisions. And I guess the point being with all of this is that we are far more capable of things than we realize, I think. And when you factor in other variables such as drugs, alcohol, and other things, I mean, that compounds it even more. So we really have to ask ourselves deeply, and this is for us. I mean, we can sit here and focus on others, but I think, at least how I would offer this, is we have to ask ourselves, what are we capable of doing? Not that we're going to do those things, but what are we merely capable of doing on a really bad day? And if we're honest with ourselves about that, truth be told, that can be a really ugly thing when we think about it.
When there is an issue known in a particular society, it can be called a shadow issue if there is evidence of denial, projection, and a lack of taking individual and collective responsibility. Therefore, taking responsibility morally, politically, and spiritually is particularly crucial. The courage with which we bear our darkness frees others from having to carry it for us. For instance, to respond to examples of massive historical suffering, wars, genocide, holocausts, pervasive oppression, etc., the effects of which persist. As human beings, we have much to learn in that regard. Denial, often connected with a wish to get on with things and put the past behind us, seems the most common approach and usually the first reaction. There are and have been many attempts to deal with difficult, painful pasts through public apologies for supporting atrocities, repentance, reparation payments after wars, pilgrimages to places of great suffering, etc.
Question for you. How responsible and accountable are you? I mean, really, how responsible and accountable are you? If we're just going to lay it out there, Because that's a big part of the work with the shadow and shadow work. And the process of integration is such that it requires you to be accountable and to be responsible and to not turn away anymore. It forces you and asks of you to turn inward, to turn towards yourself in a way in which you likely have never done. And so let's not sugarcoat it here. To do that and to be really truly accountable for your past, for your history, for all your wrongdoings, for your mistakes, your foibles, and on and on and on, to do that, that is not for the faint of heart. That is not easy. I mean, there's a perfectly, understandable reason as to why most people deflect, reject or run away from their stuff, or don't ever really truly turn towards themselves, because to do that is, as it's been said, you are facing the greatest enemy that you're ever going to face, which happens to be yourself. So in saying that, I think that's a good place to wrap up for today. I will likely continue to explore the shadow some more in upcoming videos. I think there is just so much that can be said about this, so many different angles. It's certainly prevalent in our world, in our present time and space as we sit here. You don't have to look far, you don't have to go far to see it. And again, ask yourself, if you're ever in a moment of tension or conflict, ask yourself this: is that me? Are those my thoughts? Or is that them? Right? I mean, really, ask yourself, is it me or is it them? And I'm curious what, if you're really honest, what you might find, what you might come up with. Now that, again, that's not to say like that there are people that occasionally do and are annoying, or that there are problematic people sometimes and it actually is them, or there is a lot more truth, to what you're seeing and feeling and hearing. Yes. But we have to, as much as we possibly can, I think, and it really behooves us to try to remove ourselves when we're feeling sort of this unbridled, uncontrollable annoyance, grievance, anger, frustration with others. We are challenged with the idea that maybe it's a lot more to do about us and how we're seeing things and how we're understanding things than it is about others. So that I do want to leave you with that. It's not easy, and shadow work is not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot to be able to do that, and it's an ongoing journey. So we're never done, and we always have work to do to get better and to be more out in front of it. Is how I like to look at it. And the goal isn't to get rid of it, because it's not really possible. But again, the shadow isn't all bad, so we don't, even if we could, we don't want to rid ourselves of it, because there's a lot of potential there. There's a lot of gifts that the shadow can offer us. There's a lot of growth and healing and transformation. And there's just a whole lot of good with the shadow that, if explored from the right way of seeing it, can be quite wonderful for us in the long run. And so the goal isn't to kill it or to attempt to rid ourselves of it. The goal is to make it our friend, and allow it to work wonders for us. All right. You all take care. I'm Mr. Fox. This is the Counsouler. We'll see you next time. Be well.